and I'll go back. And here we are 14 weeks later. It's 110 degrees. It's like a New York winter, though. You just don't go outside. You just look out the windows and marvel at the sun, run to the mailbox, and do all your exercise before 6 a.m.
I just saw now that New York is now restricting people. Anybody who wants to come back to New York has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So if you wanted to go back home, could you even do that now?
I think you can, but then you have to stay isolated and to make sure none of the symptoms pop up.
So they put you in like a closet at LaGuardia somewhere, and you can just quarantine there.
I think it's home quarantine. I'd like to think it's home quarantine, but I actually don't know. But just to be safe, I think I'll stay right where I am for a little while.
I think hunker in the bunker. Absolutely.
I don't know.
Yeah.
2 weeks at LaGuardia does sound sweet. That is tempting.
Well, Tom Hanks made it look so romantic in that movie that 4 people saw.
Well, they did open up Terminal B, so maybe it's better now.
There might be some really actually beautiful spots there now. I mean, they're redoing the whole thing. I mean, the place is 80% construction zone, but I bet some of the places that are just coming finished now are probably gorgeous.
With gorgeous views, yeah, definitely.
Gorgeous views of Rikers.
I'd like to thank LaGuardia Airport for sponsoring this episode of the Dad2.0 Summit. The audio companion to where marketers, media, experts, and parents discuss and define modern fatherhood. Please join us for the 10th Summit, which unfortunately will not be at New York's LaGuardia Airport. It is in Los Angeles from October 1st to 2nd. All joking aside, the airport is not sponsoring this podcast, but it is no joke that we have a guest this week, and I'm very excited to talk to my friend and yours, Doug French, co-founder of the Dad2 Summit, with him. That did not sound like a correct sentence. I'm excited to talk with him along with I'm just digging myself a bigger home.
I'm like just watching you juggle prepositional phrases and enjoying it.
Hi, I'm Jeff Bogle, and I'm a professional. And Doug, please stop me and tell everyone who we have on the line with us this week.
No, you got us there, baby. I mean, we may have lost a wheel, but we're across the finish line. I am really very happy to speak to our guest this week. I could probably spend the entire hour just telling you what he's done with his career. His CV is extraordinary. I mean, we lead with he's global president of Burson Cohen Wolf, BCW, which somebody probably calls BC Dubs to their detriment. But it's a huge global communication agency. It's part of a WPP. Jim is also an author. Out and About Dad came out 5 years ago. He's most recently written The Conscious Marketer. He is chairman of the board of directors of the PR Council. He's an adjunct instructor at NYU. He invented ketchup, probably. I mean, who knows? There's just one of those things is not true. But he's with us this morning to talk about a lifetime in marketing and where we've been and where we've headed. He's been a great friend to Dad 2.0 over the years. Please welcome Jim Joseph.
I'm so psyched to be here, and I did not invent ketchup. And let's not bore everybody to death before we even get started.
So were you like squirming when, as I was telling people what your career has amassed over the years?
How old I am. Yes, exactly.
Oh, well, to have done this at 34, Jim, that's a real,
Exactly.
You're such a wonder kid. And a
Exactly.
34-year-old with adult children, it's fascinating to even contemplate.
It works somehow.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm just grateful to all the support you've given us over the years. And I think the first thing we should do this morning, for those who haven't had the pleasure, is I read, when I first read Out and About Dad, and you mentioned that you discovered early in your life that you were a marketing geek. I want to know what that means, and what is a teenage revelation that you're a marketing geek? What does that mean?
I have no idea, to tell you the truth, but I was one of those kids.
Okay, question 2.
Yes, exactly. I was just one of those kids that always wanted to go into marketing. I'm sure I had no idea what it meant, but, I would read every line on the back of the cereal boxes when I was eating my cereal. I would only look at the print ads in magazines. I would watch TV commercials and try to figure out how they wrote that and how they filmed it. I was just fascinated with it. And then as I started to progress and think about what I really wanted to do, I just centered on that and made sure that I studied the right things in school and got the right internships And then as I actually started to do the craft, I was like, wow, I love this. Just the whole notion of branding and making something much bigger than the product itself and making it something that people bring into their lives and fall in love with and they can't live without it. It's a life's work and I love it. And somehow I knew at an early age and chartered my course towards it.
So then was your undergraduate degree in marketing and with an eye towards heading to business school eventually?
Yes, exactly. So I studied marketing and finance at Cornell, and then I got a sales job at Carnation in Boston, which we called it Carnation. And because somebody had told me, Jim, start out in sales because that'll help you in marketing. And sure enough, it did. And then went back for my MBA. And then my first internship was at Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products. And I worked on Johnson's swabs in the Johnson's Baby Group. And I thought I had arrived. I mean, it was just like glory. And then after I finished my MBA, I went back to J&J for a number of years, worked in skincare, worked on Reach toothbrush, worked in baby products again. And again, just this whole notion of like getting consumers to fall in love with you as a company and a brand was just so fascinating. And the creative parts of creating advertising and creating programs, creating retail displays, like it just, the art and the science of it all really captured me and still captures me today, which I'm very, very fortunate to still love my job and still love my career.
Now, I'm curious about this too, because some of the products you mentioned there, I'm going to guess that most of your efforts were geared toward marketing to women.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, back then we pretty much exclusively marketed to women.
So that's going to be, there's a bit of foreshadowing, as I'm actually very curious about how your strategies have evolved to embrace men as consumers of consumer goods. Since now you see a lot more dads who are homemakers, stay-at-home fathers, lots more dads talking about diapers.
Lots more dads brushing their teeth now, which is a relatively new phenomenon.
Washing their hair. Yes, exactly.
Yes. There's a whole new world of hygiene that men have discovered.
The
Jim's
masculine
career.
revolution. Now we kind of dig being clean. So please market to us. Tell us what you're selling. Yes.
So now this early career in New York, where did your home life factor in? Your marriage and the birth of your kids? They're both, as we say, they're both grown-ups now. But
well in their 20s, yes.
How old were you when they arrived in your career when they showed up?
I was always a bit of a driven kid, if you didn't already figure that out. I would set my sight on a goal, and that's where I was going to go. And a career in marketing was a big piece of that. But I also very much in my head, I would actually literally picture it when I was young, that I was going to get married to a woman and I was going to have children and I was going to be a dad. And in my eyes, that meant an active dad. Like I was going to raise my kids, which at the time, getting married to a woman as a straight man, that was obvious. There's no other options. That like literally, I didn't ever think of any other option. And having children for me was such a goal that I just put my eye on that. And I knew absolutely no other role models. People to this day still don't believe me when I say I did not know I was gay. I didn't know I was gay. I didn't have any feelings, any curiosities. Like I was so centered on my career and getting married and having children that there was just nothing else in the world that was even within sight. And again, I wanted to be an active dad. So I was going to raise those kids, which at that time, it sounds weird now. I almost feel weird saying it. But at that time, there just weren't as many active dads around. Dads focused on their career and moms took care of the kids. And that's just kind of how it worked. And there were some single dads out there, but they were definitely a rarity. And most of the families that I knew followed very traditional gender roles. So when I ultimately did get married and had my career and had my kids, and I was a very active dad, like I was doing pretty much everything, all of a sudden I just sort of halted and said, wait, is this really what I wanted? I definitely wanted to be a dad. I definitely wanted to have that career, but all of the packaging around it, I don't want to say I woke up one day and said, I don't know if this is right, but I kind of woke up one day and said, this isn't working for me. And I was in a not great relationship, and that triggered a lot of it and triggered me really thinking about, well, what is it that I want? And ultimately got separated and divorced and said, I don't want that. And I had this huge revelation. And it sounds so trite to say it, like the words just don't quite capture it, which is why I took an entire book for me to write about it. I just like literally was like, that's not what I want. What do I want? And like, oh my God, I might be gay. And it literally was like boom, 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 just like that. At a time when our culture was starting to acknowledge it a lot more. So there were cultural triggers for it as well that made me realize that there's other things about all of us that are also possibilities, not just the traditional format.
You mentioned you were so driven by the things you wanted to achieve in your life. So what do you think your parents did to influence you to want these things initially?
Very traditional family, although my mother had been married before and had my sister, so we were half brother and sister. But that was never really acknowledged or talked about either. So
Right.
on appearances, we had a very traditional family. My mom was home. My dad worked. My dad traveled a lot. My mom did everything in the house. My dad worked outside of the house, although my mom was the boss by far, like by far. So I grew up thinking all women are in control and all women drive all the, like I didn't really understand anything other than the woman being in control. My sister, very strong as well. My friend, I had a lot of female friends. They were all really strong. You know, they were women at the time, but they're really strong. So I grew up like that's how it works. The women are in charge, the men are working, and the women are running the household. So I learned a very strong work ethic from both of them as a result, because they're both working. So I learned a very strong work ethic. I learned a very strong home life and how important home was. But I also learned how important career was. And I think as a result, as I started to enter the workforce and then get married and then have children, I very much viewed it as work-life balance. Like I was also going to be very active in the house because I just learned that from my mother. And I don't think I necessarily distinguished that, well, I'm a guy, so therefore I should just do what my dad did. I did a little bit of both as I approached having a family. So I was kind of in charge of the house. I was in charge of my career. I was in charge of the kids. I just sort of like kind
Oh
of took
man,
over
you were in
everything.
charge of everything. That's something's got to break
Yeah.
eventually.
Well, it did. Yeah, it did. Exactly. It did break. It wasn't the right relationship that would have fostered that working, which is, not really part of the story, but it's part of the reckoning, I guess, and the acknowledgement.
That's revelatory because I think when you talk about how active you wanted to be in your kids' lives, we've talked about this at Dad 2.0 often, the whole idea of many times that comes from the desire to pull a 180 or in some ways to bring about a relationship with your kids that perhaps was lacking with your own father. But I'm not getting the impression that he was distant. He just worked a lot.
Yeah, he just worked a lot. And I think I wanted to be him, but more. And I wanted to be my mother, but more. And I wanted to be the best of both and put it together into one package.
Well, this is all on
Probably.
brand. Yes, absolutely. That's what makes your story that much more compelling because I think that we all drive towards something we think we want. And half the time, once we get it, we're not even sure we ever wanted it or it doesn't turn out to be the thing we expected it to be. And yours is about as in line with that as possible, given the fact that here you are in your mid-20s, unhappily married, working hard, probably throwing a lot of effort into your work. You would
Right.
anyway, but probably more so since home was
Right.
challenging. And then the marriage ends, and then you have this big discovery, which you talk about in your book to great detail. So now, one of my favorite stories of all time, my favorite blog posts was by a guy named Seth Taylor, who wrote this story about how he came out to his daughter, who I think was maybe 10 at the time.
Yeah, I love
He
that
had a
blog.
similar revelation, and he this was also at about the same time. So he was very nervous and completely out of his element in terms of not sure what to do, not sure how it would go. And he wrote so compellingly about how he sat his daughter down and just said, matter of factly, this is who I am. And she said, oh, okay. I love you anyway. And then we had hamburgers. And that's the title of the blog post.
Yeah.
Do you want to share what it was like to come out to your kids or explain how your life had changed and what, if any, impact that had on your life as a father to them?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So my kids were really young, really, really young. Like they don't even really remember mom and dad being together. My daughter's 2 years older than my son. She vaguely remembers the first apartment I had, but I think it's only because I had a friend that used to come over with his dog. And she kind of remembers the dog in the apartment. So I never really had to come out to them per se. They kind of came along the journey with me. And I was very careful, very, very careful. They really never met anybody I dated. They would meet my friends. So they were around men, but we were friends. And it was just and my friends loved them and loved kids. So they were just like, this is fun. And then when I ultimately met the person who's now my husband, he just kind of seamlessly moved through our lives with us. And he just kind of picked up and came along and then started being more of not a parental figure, but sort of like a confidant and a friend. So I never really had to come out. I had to discuss it through the years, certainly. And we would talk about it. And I was terrified. I mean, when I say terrified, I think it many, many times prevented me from coming out sooner, that it would affect them and that they're going to get bullied, ridiculed, held back, not be able to make friends. I mean, every fear that you have as a parent and as a dad, it paralyzed me a couple times. A few times through the years, we had to have those kinds of talks. Fortunately, it never really manifested itself. My fears never manifested to the extent that I thought it would be. But that's what held me back quite a bit. So I never had to have sit down and have the talk. It was more just the gradual, growth of your children as they start to realize the makeup of their family and the makeup of their community and where they go to school. It just was a gradual process. So I'm lucky in that regard. So, now that they're adults and even going through high school and college, it was just a very natural thing. I think they processed it as being different, but they didn't process it as being anything that would isolate them or exclude them from the rest of their friends, which I'm really lucky for.
So this was right around the turn of the millennium, I'm guessing, yes?
Late 90s, yeah, late 90s.
So you try and, put that in perspective in terms of what was going on. A lot of discussion about gay culture and Ellen DeGeneres, who very famously said, screw it, I need to tell the world who I am. And
exactly.
Basically disappeared for several years and couldn't get work for a long time.
And I was worried about that, too. I was worried about my career, what's going to happen. I was told by people I would lose clients, that I would lose my job, that I would not be able to make it up the corporate ladder anymore. I mean, it's a lot to handle when you're a driven kid who all he wants is a career in marketing and children. I put the two things at risk, essentially.
So there must have been, but despite all these headwinds, there must have been something. What was the trigger that said, you know what, enough? I got to be me, and come what may, I'm just going to be who I am and recognize that if I have to lose all these things in order to live honestly, that eventually is going to balance my ledger.
A few things, probably. I had become very friendly with a couple guys at work who I think figured it out before I did.
Isn't that always the way?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think looking back, at the time I had no idea, but looking back, I think they coaxed me. And I didn't even know they were gay. And this is before Ellen. This is before Andy Cohen. There were no role models, zero role models that I would look to. There were also zero role models for active dads, quite honestly. So it was like a double whammy for me. And I remember I could replay every second of it, even now, and it's been, God knows how long now. They took me to, they said, do you mind if we go to this neighborhood bar? It was in New York for happy hour. It was a Friday. And I said, sure. But as we were approaching the door, they're like, it's a gay bar. Are you cool with that? And I was like, I like these guys. So I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And I had started to figure out that they were probably gay, but they weren't a couple. And I remember walking in and seeing so I can see the visual right now I can literally see the visual in my head, seeing this packed bar of all these men, and they were me. I mean, I saw myself in every single one of them. And it was the first time that I ever really realized what a gay man was. And the instant feeling of acceptance, comfortable, I've come home, instantaneous. It's indescribable, absolutely instantaneous. And that started the journey for me of, wow, I am so unhappy with where I am. There's parts that are great. My job is great. The kids are great, but the rest of it is just so not working. And if I continue on that path, that's going to be more destructive than if I find a way to make myself happy. And I think because I was so driven, I was like, listen, people will put up brick walls around me and I'll just put my head down and barrel through them. I think I had this determination, I'm not going to let any of the bad stuff happen. I'm just not going to let it happen. probably a lot of being naive and just being willful. So, but it was that final realization of like having this intense of an unhappy life because I'm essentially not being who I am is more problematic than trying to deal with the other issues and have a happy life. And fortunately, I was right, which is good.
That's awesome. And I think, and that Jeff is kind of in that headspace now. I mean, you may have seen he's newly engaged.
Yes.
And I just had a discussion with my son about this, about he's about to go off to college, we hope.
About me getting engaged?
Yes, we did. We were like, you have to follow the Jeff Bogle template of life.
Oh, God, I would highly advise not doing that.
So he needs another inch or two of height, and then he'll get on that. But I think, yeah, the idea of recognizing, when you said you were home, I think there's something about if you can find the happiness when you wake up next to someone and breathe them in and just feel completely content. And that's happened to me like 4 times in my life. And to the extent I can relate, I think there's a sense of the chemistry of finding someone who makes you feel at home is a really powerful thing. And I know Jeff is, if you're a fan of this podcast, you've listened to him mention his now fiance many times. Yeah. And so all of us are enjoying the fact that he's about to marry someone that everyone agrees is very special.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but Jim, that whole idea of finding home and finding your happiness and finding your place, it's an awakening. I mean, obviously that was different for you than for me. I mean, finding it with somebody of a different gender is obviously a different experience culturally and socially, and dealing with people who are having trouble dealing with that, I'm sure. And maybe we'll come to that if that's a part of your story. But then mine is just a different person, but I had to introduce that person to the people that were already in my life and my children. Right. And explain how, and not even to explain, they could just see the happiness and like just the lift of what that person did for me, from a confidence, from just the way I carry myself and the way I'm moving forward with the rest of my life. If you do that honestly and share that, I think the people who love you are going to be on board because they're going to recognize that this is a good thing for you, the person that they love.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And what's part of the story too is that I dated a lot of women, like in high school, in college, I was in a fraternity. I never thought twice about it. And people still don't believe me, but I never thought twice about it. And when I went on a first date, which was not a big date, it was just a date, I was like, oh my God, this is what it's supposed to be like. All those years was just like, it just was, I was dating because that's what I was supposed to do. And it was fun. It was social and, but I was like, no, this is what it's supposed to feel like. And I remember, Jeff, the same kind of feeling, like the whole next day I was like, oh my God, I'm like a whole different person. Like I'm suddenly a lighter version of myself. I remember that very same thing. The other wrinkle to it, though, is you suddenly go from a married white career father with all the privilege that comes with that, which is a topic of we're all dealing with right now, to suddenly minority, second-class citizen, could get fired for being who you are, don't have full rights. I mean, overnight, it's a bizarre feeling. Now looking back, I understand it even more. Like I grew up with privilege and then I lost it overnight, and I've gained it back, not the privilege part, but I've gained it back because I've been able to continue to, in my work, and society has changed. So we've gained, some of those rights back. But it's a weird feeling to all of a sudden feel in jeopardy overnight. And it's amazing how we have, we still have a long way to go, but we've progressed a great deal in that time.
Well, now, as a marketer, this level of perspective now has to have been transformative, because you write a lot about how important it is for someone when you market. And we all are marketers. Anybody who creates online content, anybody who writes and wants to build a career doing something as an influencer is a marketer and has to come to terms with that fact. You have to create and you have to market. And you talk many times about how you need to relate to the people you want to reach. Because you've had so many different stations in life and now have reached the levels of upper management, how has that ascent affected your perspective of your approach to marketing and whom you'd like to reach?
I think one of the things that I carried out from all of that is that, and I write about it in my book, and I carry it with me, I think, every day, is that everybody is struggling. Everybody. Nobody has it easy. Even people who look like they have it easy, I know people looked at me back in the day and thought, oh, he has it easy. Little did they know that I was struggling with fundamental issues of who I was at the time. So we all have a struggle, some far worse than others. And we're seeing right now people are having the struggle far worse than others. And no one should pretend that theirs is worse than somebody else's, because there's far greater people who are having it far worse than any of us. But we all have struggles. And the need to understand those struggles is a huge part of being able to connect with people, whether they're coworkers, or connect with them because you're trying to market something to them. You have to understand people's lives if you're going to figure out how your brand or your message or your blog post or your piece of content is going to fit into their lives. If you don't understand their lives, which includes all of their struggles, you can't possibly do something for them that's going to add value. And I think that's why as a marketer, I've always sort of focused on, but what could we do other than just sell them this product? There's got to be something else we can do as a brand that's going to add value. I've always approached it that way. And some of the things we're going through now in the world, it's become even more apparent how brands can be helping people with their struggles, these huge monumental struggles. We're finally seeing brands step up and say, okay, not only am I going to take a stand on this issue, but I'm going to do something about it. And not only am I going to, watch as people struggle with being quarantined and lose their jobs and worry about the future, I'm going to help them figure it out. That's a really cool place to be. And I think ultimately that's why I still love what I do, because I really feel that it's brands' responsibilities, companies' responsibilities, leaders' responsibilities to be helping people. And you can't help them unless you understand what they're going through.
A lot of this has to be brand new or feel that way because so much of marketing for so long has been more aspirational. And in that sense, perhaps a little, maybe the artifice of aspirational marketing has been debunked a bit. So you do have to pivot a bit more and acknowledge that people are having a tough time. When it comes to acknowledging struggle, that seems very counterintuitive when it comes to men. Do men even want to acknowledge that they're struggling? And if so, I mean, how can you market to a man to say, dude, you're struggling, let's figure this out, and recognize that we are vulnerable and we need help? I mean, is that something that fits the marketing playbook toward men?
Absolutely. And I also think it's somewhat generational. I think the younger generations are more willing to talk about their struggles. And maybe it's a societal thing that we're more willing to listen to them as well. But the last week, it was right before Father's Day, WPP, my parent company, they've been holding these safe room discussions with employees where you can come in and listen to a panel of folks talk about a particular topic in a very safe environment. So you're free to express how you feel. You're free to ask questions without feeling ignorant, sort of a safe room. And they did the first ever safe room for dads. And I was actually on the panel. Again, coming from where I come from, where there weren't a lot of active dads, you didn't really talk about this at all. I was blown away at the level of sharing that the dads were giving to each other, and they were giving it to each other. And there was the chat going on in the Zoom room at the same time, and people are posting stories talking about how they are struggling with COVID-19, struggling with Black Lives Matter, struggling with trying to balance work and family and being home and teaching their kids and cooking meals. And I mean, all the conversations that 30 years ago women would have, men are now having them, and they're acknowledging that it's hard. And, one gentleman was talking about how his wife is pregnant and she's on bed rest. And another gentleman talking about special needs kids, and another gentleman talking about, how do I have the talk with my Black son who's a teenager and wants to be out, and how he has to be concerned about his safety. I mean, unbelievable sharing. So I think it's generational that dads and men are opening up. I think we're giving them permission to open up and to share. And I think that we're seeing that we're helping each other. So then that just fuels even more. And I think it's important as brands. And this is really where the role of influencer is beyond belief in terms of the value it adds. When influencers tell their stories and they talk about their struggles and they talk about how they solve some of their own problems, that has tremendous impact on, and right now we're talking about dads, but it kind of doesn't depend on the category. That has tremendous impact on other dads being able to express themselves and giving them permission to talk about their struggles and to seek advice on how to solve their own personal problems. So I think it is a breakthrough moment, and it's a tremendous breakthrough moment. And The more we share, the more we hear other people share. That's why I wrote my book, because I'm like, the more that I share my story and provide some level of mentorship to folks, not even men, but just folks that are going through similar things right now, maybe I can help just a little bit. Because if I had a book like that back then, it would have helped me tremendously if I had read it.
That's just always the case, right? The impulse is to, as a blogger in particular, this dates back when blogging began, but essentially you want to create the content you wish existed.
Yes.
And so you could be the resource that you wish you'd had, because you've essentially won this wisdom in a way that might have been easier had someone blazed that trail before you, or at least laid the breadcrumbs down for you to follow that. And so there is that impulse to pay it forward a bit. And I think that's a lot of what drives Dad 2.0 now, is that idea that what makes me so happy about 2020 versus 2008. A lot of people were talking about how the recession of 2008 cast a lot of men out of their jobs, put them at home. They learned more about home life and caring for children and so forth. And that was said to be a big incentive for the wave of engaged fatherhood that we're on now. And now we're looking at a global financial crisis that makes 2008 look like, a hop in a mud puddle, with double-digit unemployment for what people predict is going to be a long time. How do you think, given what we've done over the past 12 years, how do you think this financial disruption is going to bring about more discussion about fatherhood, more discussion about shared parenting, equal parenting, and the level of recognizing that, to whatever extent gender roles still exist, can we kind of put them on the trash heap, for good?
Yeah. If I could just jump in to add a piece of a question to Doug's question, what role can marketers have in kicking that trend in the ass, sort of? Can marketers help push to use this moment to make men and women and men and men and women and whatever understand how to better share those responsibilities?
I think that, and I say this all the time, brands are both a reflection of what's going on in pop culture, as well as a driver of pop culture. So I think the more that brands can show what's happening in home life across a broad spectrum, then the more they will also inspire people to feel comfortable, to explore, to expand whatever's happening in their family life. So I think it's a brand's responsibility to reflect what's going on, but then also inspire it. And I think that's, in its most simple form, that's what we can do, is just reflect what's going on and inspire those that are doing it to keep doing it. And then figure out ways to add value to those people's lives that go beyond just the product or the service that we're selling them. And again, that's where I think influencers are so important, because they're authentic and they're living those lives right alongside those consumers. So they're relatable. It's not advertising. It's not messaging. It's not a push strategy. It's not a pull strategy. It's nothing other than relatability and being a part of the community and understanding the struggles and trying to help. So I think it's a brand's responsibility to do that. And I think brands are stepping up. And even as it relates, or especially as it relates to Black Lives Matter, we're starting to see brands and companies step up and really put things in action for their own employees as well as for their consumers. And I find that inspiring. And I hope it means that this time there really will be change, that we just won't let it go by and nothing ever happens. As it relates to now versus 2008, I think you guys are so right. That was a pivotal point in putting a spotlight on family responsibilities as they shifted and as women did tend to fare better in that huge downturn. But I think a lot of that behavior was already happening. I don't think men just suddenly stepped into it. I think they were already doing it. And there was already sort of a division of responsibilities that was starting to evolve. And that crisis just put a spotlight on it. And I think that's what's going to happen this time, too, is that this massive crisis we're going through is putting a spotlight on home life and the importance of home life and all the things that home means. Because now home isn't just where we eat and sleep. It's where we're working. It's where we're learning. It's where we're teaching. It's where we're socializing. Like, home has once again become the hub. And as a result, home life has changed. And the traditional roles of male versus female, especially if there isn't a male and a female in the house, it just doesn't matter anymore. And I don't think people care. I don't think they care who does the laundry versus who takes the garbage out versus who does the cooking versus who does the grocery shopping. It's just irrelevant. And I've seen it with my teams as literally I hear all the time, like, hey, I need a couple hours off because now it's my time for child duty and then I can log back on later. Or sorry, I'm holding the baby during this meeting. Hope you don't mind. Or I'm walking the dog while I talk to you because it's my turn to walk the dog. Nobody cares. It's like we now have a glimpse for those of us, especially who work in this profession where we are able to work at home. We're getting a glimpse into people's home lives because they're working at home. And we're seeing their video and we're seeing their ceiling fan up through the video. And it's like we see their living rooms and they're working in their bedrooms. Like it's just put a whole different spotlight on it. And I think through great crisis comes great change. And I think that's one of the things that's going to permanently change is that nobody cares who does what, who's with who, why they're with them, what the family makeup looks like. We're all just living our lives. And that could be a good thing.
BBC Dad was like a novelty, and now we are all BBC Dad.
Yes.
And it's all very encouraging. And I actually am curious now, also from your perspective as an executive at an enormous company that employs 100,000 people at least throughout the world. What do you think the prospects are for coming out of COVID with more attention toward telecommuting, flex working from home, working toward more innovative ways to make balancing your work and your life a reality? Because I think a lot of men, particularly, I got a lot of pitches for the last couple of Dad 2.0s, and the topic was work-life balance is a myth and will never be achieved. This was all, of course, pre-COVID, and I'm wondering, in your position of power, and also with your perspective of what life has been like, as someone like yourself who's had his tachometer in the red, most of his life, where do you think we can go for this in terms of making work-life balance even more of a reality than we've hoped?
I think work-life balance has always been one of those goals you strive towards, not sure you ever get to it, or not that you ever get it perfectly.
Right.
But
yeah, it's called, like, it's not even balanced. I think Stuart Friedman calls it integration. You really can't. Balance,
management, work-life management.
Balance implies some level of equality, which we're never going to reach. But still, we're
never going to reach.
It's become the buzzword. But yeah, I hear you.
Right. But I think that the workplace in our industry, the workplace as we know it, is forever changed. And when this first started, people started talking about the new normal, and when do we get back as business as usual? That's never going to happen. Not in our lifetimes. It is fundamentally shifted. And I think it's fair that prior to this, we were kind of afraid of having people work at home because we were afraid about productivity. We were afraid about creativity. How can you brainstorm and how can you create and how can you, come up with ideas when everybody's home?
Micromanage.
And how can you micromanage? And we've seen overnight, like literally overnight, we've seen the polar opposite. People are actually working harder, longer. They're more productive. I think actually in the very beginning, work-life balance went way askew because people started they'd wake up I'm guilty too, wake up, not even get out of their pajamas and start working, and then find themselves, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, not having lunch, not having dinner, still working as they're trying to balance everything all day long. So I think it's fundamentally shifted. We are not going to see packed offices anymore. We're not going to see people, for the most part, who go into an office every single day, all day long, after a long commute back and forth. It's just, I don't believe it's ever going to happen. I think it's going to be a mix now. And I think people are going to work the way they work the most productively. I know that's what we're telling our people is, when we do open up the offices, they're going to look differently because they're going to have some protocols in place, but it's optional. And if you want to come in every day because that's better for you, then that's great. It's available. If you don't want to do that, or you want to come in a couple days a week, whatever, because it's all worked. Our industry hasn't skipped a beat, really. But what it also has done is it has put a huge spotlight on work-life balance because, like I said earlier, we're now seeing people at home and we're seeing their dogs and their babies and their crying, and we're seeing their struggles. After a few weeks of this, we really started putting things into place and started having internal webinars and internal guidelines of here's what you guys need to do to make sure you keep your mental well-being intact. Make sure you're exercising, make sure you're eating, make sure you're taking breaks, take some days off. We know a day off right now isn't so exciting because you're still home, but like clear your head. We never used to say that. It was almost like boastful if you said I didn't have time to take vacation this year. Like people would boast about it. Like I'm so busy. I'm so important that I didn't have time for vacation. Well, now it's like, hey, take some vacation because we want you healthy and we want your mind clear. And, if you're going to work these long days, you need a break. So while we may not achieve work-life balance, I think we're more conscious of it. And I think we're more active about it. Our HR team is actively working on making sure people are maintaining their mental well-being amidst all this. And that's not going to change.
I think the theme that runs through this whole podcast really in the world right now is the more, you've said it earlier, Jim, the more you as a marketer that you can know not just who your audience is, because we as a writer or whatever, it's always like know your audience. And people would ask you, is that 48% women, 52% men? Yeah, that's great. That's a number. But who are they? What are their struggles? What are they going through? What do they need? We're seeing that with the Black Lives Matter movement and with Pride and everything. The more you can understand the struggles of others, the more empathy you can have, the more you can give, the more you can help. As a marketer, that makes you better. And what you just said there, as employers, as bosses, as coworkers, seeing the struggle, seeing the baby crying, seeing the dog hacking on the floor behind in the Zoom meeting, all of that helps everybody just sort of, I guess it's empathy. I guess it comes down to empathy to make us get along better and to have a better work-life balance, because your boss or your boss's boss will understand like, oh God, yeah, no, that ceiling fan is treacherously dangling off your ceiling and those babies just don't stop crying. I understand that you need to get a repair person in stat and maybe go spend some time with your kid. So yeah, true. maybe that is the key there. Just knowing more about each other and listening more and actually, and maybe that takes actually seeing it on a Zoom meeting. It just makes us all better. The more we can know each other.
I'm hearing all this, and I think we're all in agreement upon this. Although we've also seen corporate cultures that run in direct contrast to this. There is, for every manager who looks into a report's life and sees struggle and sees whatever difficulties that we're all going through, there's another who says, I want to hire somebody who doesn't have that level of baggage because I want that person to be working for me all the time, be a company person. And we've seen that all the time. In fact, it's these reports that we've mentioned, the reports about paid leave came out in 2020, and why companies are still fighting implementing it, just because there are corporate cultures where men come back from when a baby is born, and how little time you spend at home becomes a bragging right. And so culturally, I mean, I love Jeff's question about how marketers can affect change in that regard, because I think ultimately it's going to take hearts and minds to change corporate culture for the better. I mean, it is. I think we've turned a corner now in terms of how more employment is based on empathy and appreciation for home life and offering flex work and offering paid leave. That becomes a crucial perk when you're recruiting, when you're hiring. It's like you can either embrace these policies or you can compete against them. And we were talking about that back in San Francisco, back in 2015, when we had several CMOs come on and say, this is the example we want to set. So what I want to know is, and I don't even think anybody has an answer to this, but there is still that toxic outlook out there. And, what can marketers do to help put that in the really profound minority so that it becomes something that we don't turn our backs on?
I think it's going to get weeded out or rooted out. I hope. I really do hope. And what I've seen in the last few weeks with the Black Lives Movement that has been so inspiring is that, it's no longer enough to talk about it. You actually have to do something about it. And one of the most inspiring quotes that I saw, it changed my thinking, and I've seen it over and over again as it relates to the Black Lives Movement, but also relates to any kind of a toxic environment, is it's not enough that you're not a racist. You have to be anti-racist, which means you actively go out and say, no, that's not acceptable. I'm not going to sit by and watch it. I'm not going to stay quiet. In fact, I'm going to change my policies and change my behavior to make sure that it doesn't keep happening. And I think that's what we all have to do. We have to say, no, this is not acceptable. We're not going to allow it. We're not going to stay silent, and we're going to root it out. And if you have people that are toxic in the environment, and toxic managers, they need to go. And they need to be replaced by somebody who's empathetic and who understands how to manage people and motivate people, and also understands how to market to people for our particular industry. So I'm hopeful about that. That's the one thing I see different now is we're hopefully for a very long-term struggle kicking into action.
So that's great. So like not a company not simply saying like, hey, we offer this for dads to be with their kids. It's managers saying, hey, you're having a baby soon. How many weeks are you taking of the leave that we offer? Because being there in those days is more important than the meetings that you're going to miss here. So do it. So that's I guess the workplace paid leave or whatever equivalent of the non-racist, anti-racist. It's take the time, man. Go be with your kid. We'll hold down the fort for you.
And here's how we're covering it for you. And here's why you don't have to worry about it. And you won't be judged for it. Exactly. It's not just a line item in the company manual anymore. It's actually an active part of you being part of this employee community is that that's what we want
you to take that because we know it's going to make you a better person and a better employee and a more fulfilled human being. And that's the kind of people we want employed at our firm, XYZ. Yes.
Exactly.
XY Media, as a matter of fact.
I missed a perfect opportunity to play.
No. If there's one benefit to being at the bottom of the alphabet, at least it. Well, what's good about this as well is that we've seen this. Media publications are big on producing best places to work for dads, and the metric has always been what's offered, and that doesn't really, because if you offer that, but under the table discourage dads from taking it. The real metric is not so much what's on the menu, but how many people eat it. Yeah. And what percentage of the men are actually comfortable enough to leave and come back and have their jobs intact when they arrive. And I think what you're saying about taking an active role in weeding out the people who are on the wrong side of history is an inspirational thing. And it applies to so many aspects of our lives. As we've said, history is not a straight line. Evolution is not a straight line. But I still believe that given the terrible turbulence that we're going through, I still think that what everyone's having the chance to do is take stock of who they are and what they stand for, and recognizing that when the dust settles, and it will settle, there will be a lot of effective change in place.
Right. Let's hope. That's the goal.
Well, this has been fascinating. I mean, I'm so glad you came on the show, and I could talk for another hour at least, because
me too.
Still much to talk about in terms of how you're going to lead your company and how that example is going to reverberate throughout. But I'm grateful you came on the show. I'm grateful for all the help you've been to Dad 2.0 over the years. I'm very excited about where Dad 2.0 can go, and I'm just grateful for all the help that men like you have shared and offered to help make this the tapestry we are.
Well, I'm particularly grateful for you, because when I was going through this, there was no Dad 2.0. There was nothing to turn to talk to other dads, to get their perspective, to understand that you're not in it alone. There was nothing. So I am inspired by the fact that dads like me who have older kids, and also dads that are going through it at the very early stages, they have somewhere to go. Even if it's just to talk, having someone to talk to is huge. But then also having the ability to understand options and navigate the world that you guys are all doing is just incredible. It was never around before. So I'm so thankful to be a tiny part of it, because it's game changing for dads. It absolutely is.
That is so true. Jim, that's an incredible place to end it there. I think anybody who's attended any of the 9 previous Dad 2s would agree with you. It is game changing. It changes lives as business people, as parents, as human beings. It's changed mine. I know it's changed Doug's in numerous ways and continues to. And I'm glad that you're a part of the Dad 2 community, Jim. And I'm glad you came on this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of your time with us. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode and for all of them so far. I think we're up to, what is this, Doug, number 37? That's incredible.
37, yeah.
That we've gotten this far. And thank you all for coming along for the journey. Enjoy the rest of your month. And I guess the July 4th holiday happens before our next episode. Time and the calendar and when we're recording this is confusing me, but I believe I'm right about that. So please do enjoy your July 4th holiday. Make it a safe one. Wear your masks, except when you're eating all that delicious food. But take care, everybody, and we'll be back with a new episode of the Dad 2 Summit podcast next week. Bye-bye.